an original.
From Story Studio Network.
Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
Let's get ready to rumble!
It's showtime.
Well, here we go. The 5th day of April, 2024. Welcome in. It's On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics Podcast. Dave Trafford here with John Wright from Maru Public Opinion. Keith Leslie, a regular contributor at CH Television, makes appearances on the O Show with Laura Babcock. And here we are, and, you know, it's been an off week, but there's been a shitload going on, shall we say, coming out of the week after the budget. And one of the things that, you know, I noticed Sabrina Nanji had posted in the Queen's Park Observer this week, and she's pretty good at it every quarter. She looks at how the fundraising is going. And I know that sounds really nerdy and down in the weeds, Keith, but when I read that report from Sabrina, it occurs to me that's exactly why Bonnie Crombie should not be chasing a seat in the legislature right now. That she needs to be out there just banging the drum, making rain, raising money, because at the end of the day, when election day comes and the campaign starts, this is going to be an air war as much as anything, and it's going to be a ground war, making sure we get people out to vote. And the only way to do that is to have the funds and the resources to support that kind of campaign. Her time way better spent, considering the numbers that Sabrina's showing. I mean, the Liberals are just not making a dent in terms of fundraising right now. That's what she needs to be doing.
Well, this is why Bonnie Crombie is not a candidate in the just called by-election in Milton, right next door to Mississauga. Practically, I don't know, most people could find the dividing line. Because she's made the decision, the party has done the calculation, and as you said, keep her out and about, let her do as much, getting her name out in front of local people, but fundraising, getting out, it's, as you say, the air war, it's going to be expensive. And it's not just the traditional old stream media buys, mainstream media. It's, of course, the Facebook, the online, all these ads, they cost fortunes, but they can be very targeted. And they're targeting, they're getting better and better at all this targeting of their demographics for their potential voters, who they need to change, who they need to flop over. All that costs serious amounts of money. And the Liberals, to their credit, managed to pay off their debt after 2 elections where they had their asses handed to them. And, came up with basically no official party status in the legislature for the last 2 elections. So it's no wonder they're down in the fundraising, but that they've managed to pay off their debt and are, building up with a new leader. It makes infinite sense to keep her outside and to, take a shot at that by-election. They appear to have a good shot there, but the PC candidate is a former Liberal, if I'm not mistaken, and very well known in the Milton community. So, and apparently it's all about a gravel quarry that could or could not be built. Anyway, that by-election aside, Bonnie Crombie decided, nope, stay outside the legislature, get herself, raise her name recognition. By the way, the Conservatives are still doing the best job of her name recognition, even though they weren't in the legislature this week. Premier Ford had a news conference every day. This is very rare, but of course he's handing out checks for the building funds and stuff like this. But when he was going on about the carbon tax, and he can't help himself, every question was referring to the carbon tax, so he's crapping on that. And then Bonnie Crombie's the queen of all of this stuff. They will not stop raising her profile, trying to paint her into a corner as, queen of the carbon tax. It's interesting, but to your point at the beginning, she's much better off to stay outside the legislature, raise her profile, and, fight back at the Doug Ford clips whenever she needs to.
Yeah, and John, I want to come back to that whole idea of, where's the diminishing return on that strategy vis-a-vis the Tories and, talking about Crombie. But when we look at the fundraising still, and the Tories way out in front, in this this quarter. But as Sabrina's reporting points out, it's nothing compared to what they did a year ago, and that was pre-Greenbelt disaster. So I realize it's kind of nibbling around the edges a little bit, but when you look at a drop off in terms of that kind of fundraising, admittedly they didn't hold the big cash event that they did last year because of it. where in that does it suggest that perhaps the ground support, and that is the money, is going to be an issue and reflects maybe trouble on the horizon for the Tories?
Well, money is always a barometer in terms of a infrastructure within the party to get things done. And this is a party that needs to be completely rebuilt. So it's not just a leader who goes out to do these sort of things. It takes a lot of people and energy to get them involved in doing the fundraising. And as Keith and you would rightly point out, making yourself aware on certain social networks and various areas to get some momentum. The Tories are absolutely great at that. And they have been for years. This machine that they have built, you can go back genetically into all kinds of different eras, and you will find that there's similar aspects to it. And the Liberals, in fact, have not been as good at it. But I think the other point, too, is that we also have to recognize that we've got a federal leader that is not very popular. When you're at 23 to 25% of the polls, and you've got a whole bunch of other issues that come to the fray, such as the carbon tax and a series of other taxes, it's not helping the provincial Liberals doing what they're going to do. And on that point, the Tories are absolutely right to be painting the Liberal leader into that corner. They have been doing so since day one. And you rightly said, the Queen of Tax. This is where they are going. And their, taxes are going to be a key issue over the next year and a half anyways. And they want to label her. So I get that, they're not raising as much money, but it's also a case of, they're also dealing with an infrastructure issue and an external issue right now that are also hampering their ability to raise the money.
So it's really interesting to see how that cycle works then, Keith, because we've talked about the fundraising part of it and what she should be doing, what she should be focusing on, and the degree to which, the Tories are mentioning her name to frame her, to actually define her. At what point, though, do we see that sort of flip? Because at some point, interested voters, and that'll happen eventually as we get closer to the election, surely, are going to say, okay, what is she all about? And they're really going to actually look at what she's doing and what is she doing in the community and around carbon tax and carbon pricing. Because she's not talking about a carbon tax, to be fair. She is talking about carbon pricing. But that's way too subtle at this point. But at some point, the Tory strategy might actually turn people to look at her and find out more closely what she's all about. That might help her.
Well, exactly. Let's judge for ourselves, I think, is how most people are going to look at it, because we've heard what Doug Ford and the PCs think of her. What do we really need to know ourselves? So I think this is what, she gave a speech at the Empire Club this week and never once mentioned Doug Ford's name. Not once. And I think that strategy, sort of the I'm here to introduce you about me, my policies, where we're looking at, why we're looking at various options on carbon pricing, not a carbon tax. This is the beginning. This is how you start at the places like the Empire Club and the Canadian Club, and you do these things. Then you go out and you repeat it in smaller venues all across the province, and you get people to know who you are. And so I think you're right. At some point, just having, Doug Ford continually bring her name up when it's really not even relevant to the discussion or the questions being asked, is going to have people, well, are they afraid of her? Why are they so intent on painting her as this queen of the carbon tax when she's clearly saying something clearly different, nuanced, as you point out, but nuance is not always great in politics, but it does count, especially as we've seen with all the premiers opposing the carbon tax. And they say, well, but gee, we looked at all the alternatives. Turns out that's the cheapest, but we still don't want it. So anyway, she can get caught in that debate or not, but it's up to her to, frame herself and introduce herself. And I think this is what voters will want to know. If we're, is there a possibility we're electing a new opposition leader here? Because the NDP don't seem to be in a position to form opposition next time even. They seem to be just constantly at 20% and below in the polls, their old traditional third place spot. Are the Liberals poised to go into second place here? Can they make it? Can they go to first place? I mean, people will want to see what Bonnie Crombie is all about and not have just Doug Ford's judgment of it.
Yeah, but I think the other thing to think about is, and I've said this for many years, is you can have, Doug Ford can get up every morning, and if 63% of the people hate his guts, he still gets a massive majority government. I mean, let's remember that they're focused on a core group of people that get out the vote, 40%, 42%. He's, batting really well on that. Number two is that's the message they want to hear. they don't want to hear, something, more broad based. It's, the reality is it's working. It is raising more money. It is the message that the Tories are getting out about taxes, and it is riding on the coattails, even though there's no love lost between Poilievre and Ford. It's riding that wave that's across the country. So, we often talk about, well, there's going to be people who want to look at, Bonnie and have a comparison between them and Doug Ford. Well, the reality is, I don't think the success of the Tories is looking over their shoulder necessarily at where the others are, but they label them, and they keep labeling around an issue. And right now that issue is taxation. And that's what they're going to scare people within the party about, saying, give us more money. We got to fight her. We got to fight the Liberals. We got to fight the Justin Trudeau halo. We got to do that sort of stuff. You do that anyways, but you're looking at, 37% in order to get a majority in this province, which means that you're focused on a very core group of people. And that's basically how they're able to do it. And with the infrastructure that they have, that's well oiled, like incredibly well oiled.
Well, John, then if they're talking to their base, how does the ad that was released this week sort of fall into that? And I'm not suggesting it doesn't, but it's the other side of the coin. And as much as you've got the Premier saying, yeah, I know, we're doing our best out there. We're really trying to do the best for the folks in Ontario, and sometimes we get it wrong. And when we get it wrong, I hear all about it, and I'm the first one to hear about it, and I'm going to go and fix it. He's not talking to his core there. He's not talking to the base.
Yeah, but first of all, the base is about 23 or 24. And so you've got another, 15 points on top of that, almost 14, 15 points on top of that. So it's not just them he's talking to. Secondly, I don't know what the buy would be on something like that, but it's more on, social media than it's going to be on regular media. In fact, it got picked up by media because a whole bunch of people who are pundits like you and me sort of said, oh, look what he's saying. But if you actually watch and listen to the commercial, it's a very, very small part of what he says. Like he's on the phone, he's getting out of the car, he's doing things. But, as soon as a single line shows up in that, it wasn't like Dalton McGuinty back in, 2011 when, he had to go on and say, look, I may not be the most popular guy, but I'm making tough decisions. It was a stark ad. Remember that, with a white background, him just standing by himself, a very effective ad. It wasn't anything like that. This was a passing line in a speech, in an advertisement that effectively said, I listen. And I listen a lot, and all I want to do is make it great for people who are getting out and about and trying to live their lives and make their lives better. And if I listen to people and they suggest I should do other things otherwise, then that's just how I am. So, a whole bunch of people jumped on a single line out of an ad. But that ad is really going to be targeted at the 40% that I just told you about. That's what they believe. They want that guy accessible. They want Premier, I'm not going to say it's Premier Dad, but it's Father Ford who's out there listening to his kids and making sure that they're all dressed and, getting out the door and doing what they have to do and getting it done. There's nothing wrong with that. But I would say that if it hadn't been for a bunch of pundits who were looking for something to grab onto in that, we wouldn't be talking about it. But even if we are, listen to the benefit that it's giving for the Tories. We're talking about, well, he's listening and he's not flip-flopping because he's listening. So I think it was a great ad. I think it was well placed. I think it's going to do well out there. And I think it's just, it's something he can say at the door. I'm listening to you. What can Bonnie Crombie say at the door? I don't even know if she's going to show up in Milton, but it's probably going to be something on taxes as opposed to I'm listening and I'm doing the best I can for you.
Well, he's being pragmatic. He's showing people which he's shown us all the time and time again, that he's not a conservative ideologue. If something is popular and the last person in his ear convinces him it's something to do, or that's something that's the right thing to do, he will do it, or he will change his mind. And I think, as you point out in that ad, admitting it, we don't always get it right, clearly referring to the Greenbelt decision. I think some of that is to his core. I think that's some of those developers that were, he said, okay, we screwed up all the way around on this one, and we're trying to make it right, and we're trying to get the houses built, and we're still on that same goal, and he's just going to keep coming back to that. So I think the ad was very effective from that point of view. And as you say, quite frankly, the people jumping on that one line from it may indeed help him. It shows he's willing to be flexible, and that's what we're talking about here. And I don't think anyone's ever accused his federal Conservative counterpart of that.
Well, the other mea culpa came from the Prime Minister, I guess a couple of weeks ago, when he said, I'm not here to be popular. And it was sort of the same idea, but it had the wrong tone. And everybody said, yeah, you're right. You're not. So it backfired on Trudeau. But in Ford's case, I think it was all, to John's point, all in the delivery, right?
Absolutely. It worked. Well, that's who he is. And he's gotten quite good. They have been doing these videos nonstop for a couple of years now. And so he's gotten very good and very comfortable in front of the camera and communicating these ideas. So power to him. I mean, it's, as John said, he doesn't have to win over 50% of the public. 37% will get you a majority. For Justin Trudeau, he's campaigning to get 32% and, get a minority again. So it's I think those numbers in particular need to be what the opposition parties really hammer during the election campaigns. This is why every vote counts, because you don't need 50% to win. You need 32% if you're the prime minister. Holy cow. I think when people realize that, they will hone their, I just think it's a point that needs to be made time and time again during election campaigns, because I don't think most people really realize that at all.
So, John, when we talk about that delivery and the messaging around, I'm just here to help out, is that what lets him get away with the comments around the foreign students at universities? I God love them, blah, 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 but I'm here for our kids, and I want to make sure that, 100% of our kids get spots in universities. Because everybody, again, one line, but people jumped on that and accused him of being, some kind of anti-foreign student, nobody's talking about him being a racist, but the idea that he's kind of pushing them all out, it's Ontario first, that it has a bad look for the province. I think he skated on that.
I think he reflected the views of the vast majority of people in Ontario. I mean, honestly, I think if you ask people whether the kids on your own street should, get into medical school and stay in a city and work in a family office, serving families and doing their work, I mean, you get a lot of people saying absolutely that would be the case. I know. Look, there's an argument to be made that foreign students coming in and learning at our institutions is a great thing because we're open to the best minds in the world, yada, yada, yada. But the reality is we've got lots of kids, even across the backyard from where I am. We had a young girl there who left high school and went to Europe and studied to be a doctor, and then was qualified to be a doctor and couldn't get residency back in this country. And she went not because she didn't have great marks. She's going to be really great, but she went because of the squeeze out that takes place. So, I mean, there's also the incentive that we see with foreign students because they've been able to charge more for that and bring them in. I mean, let's not, suggest that this is just all about, the brains of it all. It's when you've got, 18% of students who are coming into some institutions and they're bringing in a whole lot of money as well. I don't think there's anybody who would argue that if you've got some kid who's in the 90s at high school, why they shouldn't be, getting into university here at a place of their choice. And also if they want to be a doctor and serve in this country as a doctor, great. And he said it as he's opening a medical school. So, and he did qualify it by saying, look, I don't want to be painted in the wrong light from this, but I'd sure like to have kids from Ontario have a shot at this. And we've even got Queens now going to a lottery system in order to get in, as opposed to trying to screen others. And they've got to do that because of the reduction in foreign students. But no, I think he's on the commercial, and this statement and a lot of other stuff he says is on brand Ford. It is brand Ford, but it also represents the views of a lot of people in this country who effectively say, look, you grow up in a city, in a country, and you get great marks at school. Why should you have to go to Europe to be a doctor and then have a real tough time getting a residency back in this place in order to practice? What we should be focused on is saying in these medical schools is, what are the incentives for people to be family doctors? What are the incentives to keep them here as opposed to going to the United States? And there are people who will go there. Yes, God bless them. But there are a lot of places in this province that need family doctors. And that's maybe the push. Do you care if somebody got, 89 versus 99% on an exam? Look, I'll take a doctor even if they got a little less than that.
Yeah, I mean, the number of times you hear about, if you actually dug deeply into the process of selecting kids for graduate, postgraduate, whatever the program might be, medical or otherwise, how often the interview, if they can get to an interview, actually lands them in the program because they can prove that they're cut out, they have the personality, they have the whatever gift to be good at being a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, whatever it might be. But, this whole thing, and while it's great to say, I'm here for the kids, let's not forget that they've frozen funding around post-secondary education here in the province, that has been at the heart of a lot of the problems that the universities are facing, including Queen's, that in fact, making it more difficult. I mean, that kids are getting 90% and aren't getting into universities is a crime. I mean, what the hell does that say about the whole process? And, in my day, Keith, I was lucky enough to have, 82% and I got into the school of my choice.
Well, the times have changed and needs have changed, and we are in major need of family doctors in particular. And to Premier Ford's point about, keeping as many, training as many Ontarians in family medicine as possible, who wouldn't be on side with that? Of course we're on side with that. I mean, his point about, you've mentioned about people, Canadians, Ontarians having to go overseas to get their thing, and then get qualified and still can't get residency back here in Ontario. All of this, just needless paperwork and bureaucracy that needs to be cleared away so we can get as many doctors practicing as possible. The family doctor shortage is obviously, it's going to take more incentives. And one issue that really drove home to me, the government talks a good game. We're opening a new medical school in Brampton, focusing on family medicine. Or a large part of it is going to be focused on family medicine. And yet we have deals where Shoppers Drug Mart can exclude a doctor from opening a family practice in a strip mall or in a plaza because Shoppers is in that plaza and exclusive rights to all the medical things going on there. So how does that jive with your policy of getting more doctors? You've got to stop this nonsense where the corporations get away with this kind of thing. How is that in the public good for Shoppers to be able to exclude a family doctor from wanting to set up a family practice in a mall just because Shoppers is also in that mall?
Well, and again, I think that's the deeper question that he can skate around because, it makes all the other services that Shoppers is providing is framed as being more convenient and, it's local, it's blah, 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 blah. And quite frankly, I don't hear anybody bitching about that, Keith.
I'm calling them out on this, specifically on this deals with Shoppers that's going to exclude a family doctor from setting up a practice. What is the public good in that? I know it's going to protect Shoppers, but it doesn't help anybody else. And so, I'm going to keep going on. But you're right. The public doesn't go on about this a whole heck of a lot because we're into a second term of a Conservative government that's privatizing as much of the healthcare delivery as it can. And people are starting to accept it. Even we saw this week, and it's another tangent of mine I'm going to go off on. 7 families were fined $400 a day because their senior wouldn't take a residency in a long-term care home, not of their choice, but apparently these people were moved into long-term care homes that were specifically set up and catered to an Italian population, a Chinese population. And they're put in there and they don't have any cultural connections, and many of them have dementia. And this is just making the situation worse. And yet the government will say, oh, no, we haven't fined anybody. We haven't done that yet. We haven't used that $400 a day thing. Well, they have. And the government's now saying, well, the hospital didn't tell us. Here's a great policy. Here's great enforcement of a policy and application of a policy, isn't it? Doctors are just individually pressuring families and applying this $400 a day fine. Come on. This is just ridiculous. And of course, it's traumatic for families, but families aren't being just obstructionists. They're not just trying to take up a hospital bed for the good of themselves or their loved one. It's because they don't want that loved one put into not only a long-term care home that could be a couple hundred kilometers away, but into one that's culturally just inappropriate for them. These long-term care homes are rightly set up to try and be as culturally appropriate, helpful as they can be. All of this, these kind of policies, they just drive me nuts, and I'm going to continue to call the government out on these things because it just seems that they're catering to their private sector cronies and friends as opposed to making the public system better.
Well, and again, scratching the surface of getting into the public domain in terms of the conversation, it seems to me, John, it's a similar thing where we have in the back rooms the feds saying, no, that's our jurisdiction, or the province saying, no, that's our jurisdiction, whether it's infrastructure or housing or even how we deliver healthcare. As we record this, the Premier is getting set for an announcement in Ottawa about housing targets in the city. And of course, the mayor will be there. And they'll be patting themselves on the back saying, we're doing all this great work. And to some degree, we've got the federal housing minister doing almost the same thing, cutting out the province when they go to town and they actually, provide funding for the cities and municipalities. I don't think people give a rat's rectum where that money's coming from, as long as we have affordable housing being built, and let's just get shovels in the ground.
Yeah, and I suppose that when you look at what the city of Ottawa has met at 80%, and I think they've got more than that, so they qualify for the grant that they're going to get. And I think the provinces and also the federal government are stepping up to give money for infrastructure development in municipalities and things like that. I mean, look, the housing crisis is a crisis not just because of supply, because the reality is that I don't know anybody who's going to put a new house up anywhere near Toronto and not charge less than $1 million for the house. I mean, honestly, it's just the demand for the house and everything else. Where it's the affordability of the house that is causing the issue here. And I don't think, giving an extra, $18 million here or $25 million there to a municipality is going to do any good to bring the cost down. The thing that's fueling a lot of the inflation in this country right now is what we've witnessed in the last 10 days, and that is every level of government, well, not municipally, but provincially and federally, almost every day announcing a huge amount of money that's going out the door. What do people think? Where does this money come from and where does it go? Both governments in Ontario and federally are running deficits now of a significant degree. In the same breath that we can have a debate about underfunding of universities, I can just raise a simple question. What the hell have the universities done in the last 5 years to reduce spending? What have they done? Do you ever hear? We always talk about world-class institutions and having all of these classes and, we fund and things like that. And how dare you shut off the greatest minds from around the world? Well, we just went through a stage where Sean Fraser, the federal minister, opened the taps up where we could have foreign students come in. We have Conestoga College, who's sitting on $300 million out of an international student puppy mill. And all they were here for was to get landed immigrant status. And they were handing them out the back door as they went out. It's kind of like, oh, man, now we're going to penalize the colleges. For God's sake. My point being that, yes, housing is a crisis in this country. We have inflation that's fueled. We have so much money in the system that's actually government, put into the system, that the prices have risen astronomically. People can't get those homes. And I don't know whether, what the mayor is getting today from the premier is going to create any change in that circumstance. I just don't know. What I do know is, again, both levels of government, one before a budget and one after a budget, are going across this country having news conferences, handing out billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars on almost everything that you can imagine. And you can say, well, that's great. They're helping Canadians and they're helping municipalities, everybody else. But it's also driving up a deficit where this morning, we're starting to see unemployment tick up. This is the Bank of Canada with, we're seeing it now gone from 5.7, I think it is, to 6.1 today. And we're starting to get people concerned about, in the polling that I'm doing, about the security of their own job. What a country we live in where there's just a complete flow of government money on it every single day with no apparent accountability as to where it's going and what happens to it. And if you've got the money, well then, and you want more, then we should turn around and give you more. It's not a rant that I'm going through right now. I'm just saying that this 10-day period has witnessed almost every single day an announcement on whether it's, new power plants for Northern Ontario, getting people off of diesel. Good luck negotiating that with First Nations. The housing to medical schools, to all of these things. It's all stuff we need, but it's an incredible price that we're paying for it because of how much is being committed both on the top line and on the bottom line.
Well, I think, Keith, it brings us back to our conversation last week about the budget. The budgeting and the announcements are relatively meaningless at the end of the day. They are about getting elected. They are not about governing. Well,
to your point, and to John's point, the federal government in its pre-budget spending spree in the last week or so, the last 10 days, $25 billion pre-budget announcements on everything from, housing to school lunches and breakfast programs to childcare. $25 billion. That's an astronomical amount of money. I mean, it really, and this is pre-budget.
But
the budget, and it's all about the messaging. Go ahead, John.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I mean, we're the experts in this because it all started with, the crew in Ontario. Let's remember that this was Kathleen Wynne's brain trust, and it was Dalton McGuinty's group around him before they went to Ottawa. And the whole idea was tilt everything as far left as you can so that you can bring in the NDP voters. I mean, it may mean that you've got a perpetual agreement between the left to have a minority government and not a majority. But we witnessed that. We witnessed them go so far over. And so what does Justin Trudeau do? My goodness, he hasn't balanced the books a single day since he's been in office. I mean, they keep...
Because it'll balance itself, John. They'll balance itself.
Well, no, but they keep trotting out this whole... The trope about, the ratio of spending to the deficit to GDP. And so it's just an open bag of money that keeps going out. We're spending more now in interest payments than we are in healthcare. I mean, for goodness sake, we've got a federal government that is outspending itself and will never, never stop spending beyond that. And then we have the government of Ontario and some of the other governments now who are spending equally as much because the municipalities are in need of money. And yes, because of COVID, but we don't seem to have the priorities where we're saying, look, there's three things we have to kind of focus on right now. And this is what we have to do. So I'm just saying that, in the polling that I'm doing, we talk about affordability, but I think deficits and I think responsibility around that. I don't know how Pierre Poilievre is going to solve this. Like, I don't know. I mean, we don't have... the opening days. Remember when Mulroney got elected? It was Eric. Who was it that went in? Come on, Eric Nelson. Eric Nelson was made the deputy prime minister, Leslie's brother, and who went in with a task force from the first day that they went in, and it was on the reordering of government and to slay part of the deficit. And you get Michael Wilson in there that did that over the period of time and brought the books back. We don't have that. We don't have it at any level. We have no discipline. So all I'm saying is all of the money that's being put into the system. Yes, we're helping people who need groceries because we've now got billions being spent on that. But it fuels more money in the system, which then allows for more inflation to take place, which means that, of course, now you're going to be spending more on houses and a whole bunch of other goods because there is more money there. So I'm not asking, especially Dave, because of the poverty stuff that we've talked about before, to cut off those folks. But I got to tell you, the last 10 days have been mind-numbing and head-spinning to see how much money is being announced at a time when there's massive deficits. So you got to have priorities. I don't see it anywhere in the system. Like I don't see it at all. I see rhetoric, but I don't see priorities to do things about it.
To John's point about discipline by these guys, the sunshine list came and went, and as it does every year, and we can argue about how outdated a 100-grand threshold is. But one thing, Colin DeMello dug into it, and he came out with the fact that the Premier's office in 2019 had a budget of $2.9 million for 20 staffers. Last year, it had 48 staffers and a budget of $6.9 million. Where's the discipline there? That's a gravy train chugging right into the Premier's office. I'm sorry, but really you went from 20 to 48 staffers and your budget more than doubled for a Premier's office. Why? What is the justification for that? Seriously. A government we talk about discipline and priorities. Where's your fiscal priority? Just on that alone. It just doesn't seem to ring true, let alone the fact that they've spent more money every year than they took in, and they spent more than Kathleen Wynne ever dreamed of spending.
Well, there comes a point, I think, some people would say, I get your point, Keith. Other people would say, that's mice nuts. I mean, honestly, it's a rounding error on lunch for,
But it's the core, it's the top.
I understand that. I look, however, at the other side of the public opinion equation. It says, all right, you're spending all of this money. You're doing all of these things. Am I better off than I was a year ago? Am I making progress? Is our country making progress? I mean, you said that you're going to spend tons on electric batteries, and all of a sudden now, it's pushed off 2 years. Why? Because the market is soft. Did anybody ever sit, in a room and look at my polling for both Canada and the United States that effectively says lots of people would love to have these cars, but the same problems that exist with these cars have existed for years. And it's called, I can't make it from here to there because there's no charging place. And secondly, it's beyond my cost in order to buy one of these things. And so it's kind of like, well, let's criticize people now getting hybrids. Well, you know what? Maybe hybrids are the way to go because that's it allows people to get somewhere and to contribute to environmental greening at the same time. But now we've invested all of this money. Okay, great. So when Ford pushes back on this, does that mean you got to pay the workers now too? Like,
We mean Ford Motor Company, let's be clear.
Yeah, sorry. The Ford Motor Company. Yeah,
the other Ford nation. Yeah.
Yeah, the Ford, but government may be on the hook for paying for all the workers that don't have the work now. So again, you got to sit back here and say, if you didn't believe that you have any fiscal responsibility at all and looking at the deficits that are going to go up, and I guess, if you've been convinced that battery power is the way to go in the future, well, then there's no problem in just opening up the bucket and handing out the money all the time. And I just think that this is going to become an issue, a polling issue. We'll be sitting here a year from now. And I swear to you, if there's even a federal election campaign, they're going to come back with tales that were even well beyond what we even think we're spending. And I think you have to ask the average Ontarian and the average Canadian, are we better off? And Keith, to your point, somebody with, needing some kind of long-term care and they can't get it after all of these billions seem to be done every single day. We've redefined long-term care by what? Okay, so your bed is now a dwelling and we'll count it towards getting new housing in the province of Ontario. I mean, it's so ridiculous.
Well, I'll just say that I'm better off than I was 3 years ago because I do drive a hybrid, and so the amount of money I've spent on gas has actually gone down considerably, almost 40%. So I'm
That's a hybrid.
happy with that. But the and to your point, John, around the market around the EV, this has been a soft conversation for 4 years, 5 years. That this was a predictable outcome in terms of where we are right now in the market, and I had to laugh, people aren't buying the EVs, so the market's soft. Well, how the hell do I charge it up and have it reliable? Do I want to invest in it? For sure. And I think for the most part, people are on the side of the angels when it comes to that stuff, if it's going to help the environment. But as soon as it becomes an affordability issue, it hurts. And the second part is, I can't get from here to there. Well, then it doesn't make sense. Call me when it's ready. It's a half-baked idea. It's a good idea, but it's half-baked. Let's make sure it's fully baked. Then we're all in. But, we finished last week talking about productivity, Keith, and you brought up, well, they're investing in all these, these EV jobs and everything else. Well, where the hell did that go in 10 days?
Well, it reversed in a hurry, didn't it? Ford's going to lay off 2,700 people for these 2 years while they delay this. It's a massive investment for them in the Oakville plant to retool. But to put that off for 2 years after the provincial government has invested so much, I'm pretty sure the feds are on board as well for billions of dollars for these EV plants. And we're not even sure. We're just not sure the technology may develop, but we're not sure at all that we're going to have the infrastructure where there's enough charging stations. And say they have charging stations every 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers along the 400 series highways. How many? How many people are going to pull over? Like, you're going to have to wait for that guy to charge. And if your car is cold, you can't charge from a cold. Apparently, they won't even take a charge if the car is a certain degree of cold. You can be waiting on the side. I just can't see people doing this. If you can't get basically a Toronto to Montreal run with a range and without having to stop or maybe stop once, people aren't going to buy into it. And the infrastructure, if it's not there on the 400 series highways, where else is it? In other places, other parts of Ontario, people travel 100 kilometers a day to get groceries or whatever. So if they don't have the range to go there and back without stopping to charge, and they don't have the charging infrastructure, it's just not going to catch on. The infrastructure is clearly what's needed.
Well, not to get too far off on a tangent or to be too down in the weeds, but just as an aside, the big broadcasters are all in front of a Commons committee, and Bell is going to have to answer for its layoffs. And the Prime Minister was, I think the word pissed off came out of his mouth when he talked about Bell's decision to lay off 4,800 people. Is the Prime Minister pissed off to hear that Ford is taking government money, which Bell was not necessarily, and laying off half as many people based on a promise they made to make his climate initiative ring? I mean, the whole idea, EV was going to be the backbone of this, next to the carbon tax. Where's the pissed offness from the Prime Minister on this, right? So that it cuts both ways when it's government money drives me crazy. I'm not sure where we go with that. I just wanted to put it out there because it just, seriously. it just drives me crazy on so many levels that's what becomes focus. And I think to your point, John, around, that's the priority in terms of where people get angry at government levels, as opposed to what's going on in long-term care, what's going on in infrastructure, what's going on with, where you live and making a home more affordable to live in. Maybe a year from now, we won't have any more answers, and maybe a year from now, we won't have anything more to talk about on the podcast because we're just kind of chasing our tail on all of this. So, with that cheery note, you guys have a great weekend.
And you do.
All right, we'll see you. It is On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast for Story Studio Network.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.
Yeah, it really did feel like I was sitting around without the pigeons this morning. That was pretty good. All right.